I didn't realize it at the time, but when I came back, having met all these amazing people around the world, the one thing that stuck with us everywhere we went is that no matter how different the lifestyles were, people were so kind and open and generous and warm, and they were just all the same. At the core, people are all the same. Similarities are so much greater than differences.
This is the Changeup. I'm Keith Hernandez. On this episode, we welcome Akeelah Kuraishi, CEO and co-founder of Little Global Citizens. Little Global Citizens is an award-winning children's learning subscription box, winning just in the past month the Subscription Trade Association's award for Best Craft Box and the Mother's Choice Gold Award for high-quality kids product. We talk with Akeelah about leaving the digital ad sales world to travel the physical world, raising children to be inclusive and curious, and starting a direct consumer business from scratch. All right, Akeelah, it's great to see you. It's been way too long. How are you?
Keith, it is fabulous to see you. It has been a long time. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm really thrilled to talk to you today.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been, I think, over 2 years since the last time we saw each other, and you've continued to grow your company, Little Global Citizens, as a CEO and founder. Tell us a little bit about Little Global Citizens, what it is, what it does.
So we're a children's subscription box company, and we teach kids about cultures of the world, one country at a time. I created Little Global Citizens to help foster open-mindedness, global and cultural awareness in young kids by helping them to build an understanding of the world and, quite frankly, a love for the people in it. So what we do is every 2 months we send families an exciting box that teaches their child about a new country, and we bring it to life by highlighting all of the most important aspects of that culture, and we do it in a fun way that's tangible and accessible to kids and makes it enjoyable for a whole family to get involved with. We put crafts in there, we put games, recipes, music, storybooks. So if your child is building a replica of the Great Wall of China, they're learning about Chinese culture. They are learning about Russia, they're designing their own Fabergé egg, or they're cooking a traditional Nigerian stew. And we make it fun and hands-on for kids to learn about this big, beautiful world that they're a part of.
That's so cool. And what I love most about your collection is that there are hands-on activities. There's the audio-visual, but there's also the kinetic learning that happens with that. What age group is this designed for?
So we actually have worked with educators. We design the boxes for ages 4 to 10-year-olds. And part of the reason that we start kids off very young is from as young as 6 months old, kids are able to see differences in skin color. And by ages 2 to 3, kids are actually noticing differences in gender, race, skin tone. They're not noticing these things as negative. They are just noticing differences. And it's a very impactful time for us as parents and educators, teachers, grandparents, mentors, to help shape a child's view of people who are different from themselves, who look different, speak a different language, wear different clothes, and eat different foods. It's a very, very informative time, and we can have such a positive impact by exposing kids to different people and cultures and lifestyles at that age.
Something I saw in an interview that you said that I really loved, and I'd love to have you peel it back a little bit more, is learn from, not about. Learn from different cultures and not about cultures. What does that mean to you, and what does that mean to the company?
So I think there has become a much bigger focus right now on the need for children to have access to diverse stories, diverse inputs in their life. But I think we have to be really careful about the way that we do that. And something that I learned when I was coming up with Little Global Citizens, I spent some time with a lady called Dr. Carlotta Penn, and she is an author of diverse children's books, and she also has a PhD in diversity in education. And one of the things that we talked about a lot was how children need to learn from other cultures, not just about other cultures. Instead of looking from the outside in as an outsider and observing as kind of specimen style, it's important to teach children there are all these people around the world. They have amazing cultures. They have amazing homes, lifestyles. It may be very different from yours. And here is what you can learn, not learning about them as an outsider. Obviously, the best way to have that interaction is for your children to go out in the world and meet people. who live in Kenya, live in China, live in Ghana. That's not always possible, feasible, for so many reasons. You have a daughter, you know how traveling with kids is not the easiest thing in the world.
But we tried doing it, right? Like, pre-COVID, we did try to get her out there and see the world. I've told this to a lot of people, but one of the tricks to getting your kid out internationally is before 2 years old, they don't charge you for a plane ticket, right? So we tried to take advantage of that as much as possible and just keep her on our lap or keep her in a bassinet. But then COVID did hit. And so we haven't traveled anywhere in 2 years. Have you seen that has changed kind of the interest that people have? The curiosity that I think you mentioned earlier in kids is always going to be there. Are people tapping into your books and your packages a little bit more because they can't travel now?
So I think there's been a couple of things. The whole interest in ensuring that kids have a global awareness has amped up over the past 2 years. Obviously, not being able to travel has meant that families who do understand the importance of giving your kids a global and cultural education, they have been limited. So we did see a big influx from that audience. There's also the kind of very pragmatic side, which is that kids have not been going out, socializing, going to school as much. And so parents were left looking for something easy, convenient, fun, interesting, exciting that they could bring into their home and, kind of have a fun experience when they're not able to actually physically go out so much. So there's been a couple of different things at play, but we've definitely seen a huge growth over the past year and a half. It's been really fascinating to see. And also as a parent myself, it was one of the most frustrating things because as I was seeing such a need in families since March last year, March 16th specifically, the last day that kids went to school.
Yeah, it'll be etched in your memory forever, right? Like that date will...
It is.
Yeah.
But, for me as a business owner, I had all the stress and horror of dealing with COVID, dealing with how am I going to keep my kids safe, my kids are home. But on the flip side, I was seeing such a need from other families to have something delivered to their doorstep, convenient, keep the kids entertained, parents are working. You need something that a child can open themselves and be somewhat engaged in on their own. So I think that was probably the most difficult 6 months as a business owner, of knowing that there was such potential for our business, as there was such a need for families, while I have my own 2 little boys at home who are running amok and going wild, and I can't take my eyes off them for a second to do a conference call because they're, getting into who knows what, the pantry and peanut butter and all sorts of things. So it's been kind of an interesting time to have a business that serves families and serves kids and also brings something of the world into your home.
Yeah. What I love about it is the diverse things that are offered in each package. How do you bring those together? Who are you collaborating to make sure that this package is fulfilled?
So this was not my area of expertise. The idea from the business came from my own experiences in my life and then having my own child. But the arts, the crafts, the education aspect was really not my area of expertise. And I think if I had thought about it any longer, I probably wouldn't have embarked on the business because
that's interesting.
People obviously go to university for years to study art, study education, study child development. So I think one of the most fortunate things that happened for me was having great resources at hand. My son's teacher, who is a Montessori teacher, is also a world traveler.
Oh, cool.
And so I was able to work really closely with her and collaborate at the beginning as we were coming up with what is age appropriate for 4 to 10-year-olds. It's a wide age group. How do we make something that goes in a box, tangible, exciting, fun? How do we make sure that the materials are different in every single box that goes out so there's not repetition, kids are always excited, the contents are fresh? And how do we make sure that it's touching on all the different and relevant developmental skills that you as a parent want your child to be constantly working on and learning from? I don't know if you know anything about the Montessori philosophy, but it very much is focused on the whole child, teaching the whole child, not just the basics of education, but also a social emotional learning. And culture is a really important part of what the Montessori curriculum teaches children. So being able to collaborate with that teacher, and now I also work with an art teacher, an art director. Those collaborations have been essential. And I've learned so much more than I ever dreamed I would starting a business, from the child development and the education aspect.
That's awesome. And, I think for so many people, solopreneurs or dual partnerships, there's often this thinking from others that, oh, you're doing it on your own. You're kind of pulling yourself up from the bootstraps. But it sounds like there's a lot of collaboration. I know in my experience, it's the collaboration that's key, not only from the people helping to build the projects, but also the other people that are solopreneurs or kind of small partnerships, small businesses. Have you found a community of like-minded folks that are helping you out? Maybe not just with the actual production, but maybe kind of the sanity part of running your own business?
Number one, you're telling me there's a sanity part to your own business. I have no idea about that. Let me know where you found that. I would like to buy some of that. So interestingly, I have been fortunate to have tapped into the local community. Florida is very much focused right now on supporting small businesses, tech businesses, women-led businesses. So I've been very fortunate to have tapped into that community. Our business currently is a part of a collaborative called Embark, which is all different stage businesses, but it has a goal of, as a collective, helping from a resources standpoint, an advisory standpoint, and also that community aspect. But interestingly, I've actually tapped into a lot of people that were a part of my previous life in the advertising community. So one of the first things that I did when I realized there was a lot of support that I was missing is I tapped into some of my old friends that I used to work with in the advertising industry. And 3 women and I started kind of like a weekly, just like a support group. We had some fun names for it that I won't share because they're too cheesy. But we were all at different stages in our career, starting our own businesses, starting our own consultancies. And so we would just get on the phone. And even though everything that we were doing was so different, we would just brainstorm, but mainly support each other.
Awesome.
We would talk each other up. We would share opportunities. We would constantly, if you learned something new on Instagram, just forward it along. If you saw a great article that you knew would help their business, forward it along. But also a lot of the emotional support, reminding each other, hey, you did great. You were just interviewed for this. You won this award. You wrote this article. All the things that I think when you start working on your own, you don't really give yourself credit for.
Great point.
I think that is the hardest thing that I've found. Maybe you've found the same, because what you're doing never feels like it's enough. You've never reached where you want to be. There's always opportunity to serve more families, to engage with more kids, for us to be in front of more teachers, more eyeballs. Always feel like there's more you could be doing. Nobody ever stops to say, well done. You have sent out boxes to thousands of kids around the country already.
Yeah, that's an important fact.
It is. I mean, do you find like you have a support system?
A bit, yeah. I think, one of the things that I, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've realized, and, my business partner says this and I love it. He's like, the further you got on the corporate ladder, the nastier it would get and the harder it would get. And, kind of the less friendly people would become. But what I found on the entrepreneurial side is, especially where you're not competing against others in the same line of business, people want to help and people want to confide, and especially they understand because they're running through the same thing where they don't have that support system, right? Like 2 things. One, like we worked together at BuzzFeed, for the folks that are listening, for about 4 years. And we would have that outlet of, let's go grab a drink and talk about this and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Are you struggling with this as well? That it didn't have to kind of like be a manager. It could be somebody else that was at your wavelength. And then 2, we were both in sales where it was very clear cut if you hit your number or not. You had a scoreboard that you can look at every quarter or every half or every year. And you'd said, okay, I'm exceeding the expectations here and I'm being rewarded for it financially, but also with potential promotions and things. Where when you're an entrepreneur, you might make up that number or you might have that number, but there's no kind of gratification that comes with it externally or additional bonuses or anything like that. So that part was also hard for me, coming from a world where it was very, very clear cut whether you were doing well or not. and trying to find those folks that can kind of balance and kind of better understand, like, okay, why does that matter to you? Why do you need to have a W at the end of every quarter, right? I think that part has been really different in the entrepreneur world. Have you seen a similar thing? Because you're a very successful salesperson and sales manager. Do you see the same thing with that wanting for the gratification of sales numbers or revenue numbers or specific goals?
I feel like because we are a B2C company,
Yeah.
The revenue gets checked every single day. I'm constantly looking at those. And having been in sales for a long time, obviously those goals are really important.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's a lot of the intangible things that are missing. And like you said, it's the interaction with the team. It's feeling like you're all working together for the same thing. It's feeling like you're all achieving the same goal. I think the hardest part of doing this on your own is it's mindset. If you wake up and you're feeling great and you're feeling strong and you've got a fabulous podcast going on with Keith Hernandez today, you wake up and you're jazzed and you're ready to go. But if you wake up and you get a customer email that says, hey, I have some feedback and you might not like this, it's hard not to take those things very personally. If somebody knocks what you're doing, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, how timely of a fashion you're doing it, there is absolutely nobody else to turn to. So you do take it very personally. But I think I've been very fortunate having my team of women that I've always kind of gravitated to. And we've been doing this for nearly 3 years now. And then with the collective that I'm a part of, I have kind of like a one-to-one mentor. And sometimes she gives me great, amazing feedback on the business. Sometimes we'll sit and do brainstorms and have business ideas. And other times it's literally just, for me to give her a download, just get it off my chest, because nobody else knows or cares about the business as much as I do. And she will just listen to me, talk through issues. And sometimes you just need someone to say the words out loud to, and you've talked yourself into your answer.
Absolutely.
But you need to say the words out loud. I never realized how important it was to say things out loud.
I've had a career coach and I've really enjoyed it just for that reason, right? Of just getting things out. Maybe they're not fully formed, but they start to form, and have somebody respond and listen. Where, I think one of the hardest parts is you don't know other people's motives for listening. Whereas a career coach or a mentor is there, you feel a little bit more of a safe place with them. Why do you think the knocks hurt more than the praises feel good? It's something that I've also noticed, right? Where, somebody might say something on Twitter, or those little knocks tend to kind of wear on you a little bit more than the high praise that friends or colleagues would give you. What do you think that's all about?
I think for a lot of people that are used to being successful and used to being achievers, I think that when it is your own business, you just cannot help but take everything personally.
Yeah.
I think it's quite hard unless you have a team with you to sit and look at those comments. And often they can be constructive, but it takes a really strong person to be able to take their own personality and their own ego out of it, and to subjectively look and see, is this person actually telling me something valuable, or are they venting their own issues?
Yeah.
And I think with social media, there's so much of that. People feel quite happy to comment on, either an article you've written or a Facebook post. And people definitely are more brutal, I think, when they're anonymous than they ever would be if they were standing in front of you having a conversation. So I think you have to learn to take some of those things with a grain of salt, but it hurts at the beginning, whether the comments are valid or not.
Yeah. And you're like, whoa, there was a time, man, it was about 3 years ago, where I wrote something about Donald Trump, and Huffington Post had me write an article, and I was getting thousands of tweets and death threats and all of this stuff. And what I realized was they were just finding things on my Twitter profile and using them against me. And so I deleted all of my tweets because I was kind of like freaking out. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And all I had left was a little picture of me in a little blue suit that I wore to a friend's wedding. And 5 tweets in a row just made fun of my suit. And I realized that it's because they had nothing else, because none of my tweets were around anymore. So this one guy was like, look at you with your fancy suit. It doesn't seem like you're too worried about money now. And I was like, oh, it was a really good realization for me, because I was like, they have nothing else on me. I deleted everything else. And it really changed my perspective on social media and changed my perspective on kind of when people reach out, because you're totally right. So often the people that are reaching out have other things going on in their life, have other emotions that they're kind of carrying on them. It's easier to be cynical. It's easier to be negative. We're finding this all out with the Facebook papers that are coming out. It's way easier to kind of stoke hate than to offer hard praise. So I'm with you on that.
Well, I think it's interesting. A lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs will say that the first or the most valuable hire that freed up the most of their mind space is hiring somebody to do customer service.
Yeah. Interesting. So you did that? You hired customer service?
We are in the process of hiring someone to do customer service.
Great.
For me, because we're a consumer product, it is really valuable for me to see questions that come through and comments that come through. I need to know what the points are that we're not addressing on the website, what is not clear for people to understand. So I've kept a close eye on that. But a lot of people say that's the most valuable thing, because it just kind of like, it lifts that weight off your mind and kind of, it will eliminate any of the negativity. But I do worry that if I wasn't keeping an eye on it myself, I would miss opportunities to improve or grow. But I can totally see why that's one of the first things to go for people, because they don't want that.
Yeah, they don't want to get mired in that, right? So you've now been at it for 4 years, is that correct? 4 years?
Yeah, this is going to be our 4th Christmas, I think.
Oh,
yes,
awesome.
That's how I measure it. Q4 is obviously the big quarter for us.
That's great. And so what are some of the lessons that you learned year one that, looking back on it, you can laugh at yourself and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't know that when I first started off this business?
Can I say everything?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
So having had a career in digital advertising, I had never been involved with physical product. So there were just so many very steep learning curves there. We were lucky. When we started the business, we did kind of a soft launch with friends and family who, I'd just been telling about this concept. I want to teach my kids about countries and cultures. I'm going to do it through these boxes. We're going to make them fun, interactive, engaging. If you're interested, let me know. So we started with about 80 subscribers the first month. So the good thing about that was we were able to kind of test everything. My sons and I read every single storybook that was under consideration for the box. We physically tested and did every single craft, every single game, every single recipe that was in that box. We still do that to this day. Anytime we're developing a new box, I test it on my kids. I test it on friends' kids. So I'm very fortunate that I have like a built-in test audience with my own family and our friends. So that was really valuable. But just learning about the physical product. This is a product for kids. So you need to make sure that all of the items that go inside are safe for children. It needs to have appropriate warnings. You need to get all of your legals sorted out. You need to actually find suppliers for every single tiny product that goes in there. I had no idea how much time it takes to source, 50,000 sequins or 100,000 pom-poms.
That blows my mind too, because I've talked to a few people who have now built physical products, and just the vetting and figuring out who should be building these products. How did you go through that process? How did you find the right people?
So at the beginning, physically sourcing supplies, because we were at small quantities, was using kind of third-party retailers. As you get to bigger volumes, you need to be going direct to the source. So instead of using, you're going direct to the producers of paints and markers and sequins and pom-poms. Sometimes those are overseas. I try and use US-based as much as possible, but that in itself was a pretty big learning curve, learning how to cut out the middleman and go direct to the source. So that was a big thing. And then obviously there's the reliability of your suppliers, which has been thrown up in the air this quarter and last quarter. Yeah. So keeping tabs on useful and reliable quality suppliers, it's a whole job in itself. And it's definitely something that I have probably spent more time on than I ever would have dreamt I would, because you're always looking for quality, you're looking for value for money, you're looking for something that will have longevity in a family instead of just throwaway items. So that was a huge learning curve. I knew nothing about that. I was the person who goes and buys my stuff at Target for the kids. Like, buy it, it's already packaged,
Yep.
it's easy. But now all of a sudden I'm the person who is making the packages and making a convenient, fun activity for the kids.
Do you now have a new appreciation and eye for when you see packaged goods that you didn't have before?
Yes, I do. But I also know what's happened on the back end.
Yeah.
So I can kind of try and filter out just the glamour of the packaging and see what's actually inside. But the other thing that was a big transition for us was going from the physical production of the boxes ourselves. I used to stand in my kitchen until midnight, physically putting pom-poms in a bag, putting markers in a bag, putting clay in a bag, till you get to a volume where that's not feasible, and then you have to outsource. And I think outsourcing is one of the hardest things as a entrepreneur that you can do. You have to release so much emotionally, physically. There was a big learning curve when you take somebody on board. You have to train them to do it. You have to kind of take away the assumptions that you have in your head from having been doing the business and knowing all the nuance and intricacies. You have to realize that somebody knows nothing about your business.
Right.
They don't necessarily have the same start to finish mentality. They're focused on the task that you've given them. So that, I think, was the biggest learning curve. We went through a few different production houses, warehouses. That was a big learning curve. And then even getting the warehouse that we have up to speed now has taken a lot of back and forth, a lot of time of me standing, showing them, what do I mean when I say a bag's half full? There's nothing worse than a kid starting a craft and realizing that, you know, there were 2 pom-poms missing. But that's ruined the whole day for that child. So you have to really sync up and not leave anything to nuance. So there's been a lot of time I didn't know anything about warehouses, suppliers, any of that supply chain stuff. So huge learning curves all around.
It's so fascinating. And would you say it has to be trial and error? It sounds like, right? Like in this early stage of doing it, the only way to learn if a production warehouse is going to be good is by giving them a shot. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think if you've built your business and built your product on your own from the ground up, then you have a lot of insight into what could go wrong and what is the right way to do it. So you can go in there with a lot of very specific direction for them. But until you actually physically stand, and they call it on the line, until you stand on the line in the warehouse and you see people putting items into your box and prepping the box and building the box and sealing the box, did you seal it correctly?
Yeah.
There's such minutia that when you're doing physical products, you can't even foresee until you like watch somebody do it. You're like, oh no, don't tape the box like that. Nobody will ever open it. You need one piece of tape that goes from the top to the bottom. It's mind-blowing. And I'm so grateful that we have a good team now that's been with us for a year and a half. So
that's fantastic.
They have history with us. We have history with them. We understand each other's jargon and language and terminology. But it takes a while, and it takes a lot of patience on both sides.
Were you always that detail-oriented? Because myself, you know, something's a little bit crooked and all that, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Who cares? Let's move on. I'm always like, big picture, it's totally cool. Were you always that detail-oriented? Is this kind of a new skill that you picked up with the company?
This is definitely not my area of expertise. I had to become detail-oriented because I was standing physically building the boxes myself. And I just could not allow for any box to go out with an item missing, because that was landing back on my doorstep. That means I made an error. Somebody had paid for something and there was an error. So thankfully I can count the number of errors that I ever made when I was physically building the boxes myself. But no, that's not my forte. I am much more like you, a big picture person. I want to be thinking about the broad scheme of the business, where it's going, how it's impacting children's lives, how it's going to impact the next generation. And that's why I'm grateful that now I can pass that off and know that there's a team doing it and they're all up to snuff and that's their area of expertise.
That's smart. That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's advice that I always get from people is become an expert at it and then fire yourself from it, right? Like get really good at it so you know how to explain it, because if you can't explain it, no one will ever be able to do it the way that you want them to do it. And then it's just going to be frustrating. So you moved from Chicago to Florida. Talk a little bit about that move. Talk to me a little bit about what went down to kind of get the groundswell going on starting this company and leaving the corporate world that we both were part of.
So it's interesting you were talking about your business coach. When I moved to Florida, I was working as VP of sales out of the Midwest for BuzzFeed. And I had a business coach. And interestingly, through conversations with her, she made me realize that there were things I needed to reprioritize in my life, and that there was a way that I could keep multiple things going at one time. I think I'd been very tunnel visioned, that it was career, 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 career. And I'd lived away from my family in England for 1.5 decades, coming up to nearly 2 decades.
Oh, wow.
As my father got older, I realized I needed to be closer to him physically to help him out, help my mom out. My dad is 87 now, and he's doing really well.
Amazing to hear. That's great.
Yeah, he's rocking. And I think part of that is, having myself around, having my husband around. My brother now is here in Florida. People always say that sort of interaction with your family and your community helps, especially when you get older. And I've seen how that's had a positive impact on my dad. And so my business coach was a person who kind of pointed me in the direction and highlighted to me that it didn't have to be one or the other. These two things could live concurrently. There was no reason why I could not request a transfer and become a remote employee. So I did that. And I was surprised and I was blown away at how it actually could function, because I just always kind of followed the prescribed path, I think, in previous years. So moving out of the city, moving away from kind of like the everyday client-facing interactions kind of opened things up in me. And then I had a lot of life changes. I had my first son, I had my second son, and it really made me wonder how parents, and mothers in particular, do the type of corporate job that I had, where I was traveling a lot, managing people, had very, very high sales goals. It was high pressure and high stress. And it made me wonder how people do that, balancing having children and being present for their children when I was expected to be on a plane, leaving the house at 4 a.m, coming home at 11 o'clock the next night. I'd missed 2 days. There was extra pressure on my husband. And that, in conjunction with having the realization that I would be interested in starting my own business. And for me, there was definitely an inflection point around the 2016 election when Trump was elected. I started reading a lot of stories about children being targeted in a racial fashion at schools.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I can't bring my children up in a world like this. I have to do something. It's not right. I don't want my kids to be a part of it. And I know better. So I need to do something to change it. So those things all kind of converged at the same time. And it definitely was an inflection point for me starting the business. And I think if those things hadn't all happened at the same time, I probably would have dragged my heels and maybe never even done it.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't prepared. Like I said, I didn't know anything about the consumer side. I didn't know anything about the product side. I just went for it, and I learned as I went. And I think it was the best way for me to do it. Otherwise, I would have been too focused on making it perfect before I started, and it never would have gone anywhere.
Yeah, that's such a recurring theme that I've heard from smart entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, is, they didn't just wake up one day with the idea and start going. And, that kind of myth of, the eureka moment, okay, I'm going to leave everything behind and do it. It kind of gestates for like a year or two. And it sounds like this was an idea that you had for maybe many years before you actually got it off the ground. Do you look at that time back and say, oh man, I wish I started years before? Or do you say it's kind of good that I let it incubate in my brain and kind of waited for this moment to make it happen?
I think I wasn't ready before. I think there were a lot of things that kind of were seeds throughout my life that got me to a point of realizing just how important it was for my kids and other kids to appreciate and respect and gain an understanding of other people and other cultures. It started with me being brought up in a bicultural household. Right. My father's from Pakistan, my mum's from Scotland, I was brought up in England. So I always straddled cultures. My parents traveled with me as much as we could. We went to Kenya, Tunisia, Yugoslavia, Spain, France. So that was always a part of me, and I appreciated how important it was that I'd been places and seen people. So things didn't surprise me. Seeing somebody who dresses different or eats different foods, has a different religion, it didn't surprise me. It was just a part of life. It was all normalized for me. So that was always kind of a part of my own persona. And then when my husband and I took a year off and we backpacked around the world, that was just a huge blast. And that was probably the biggest seed of foundation for the business. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I came back, having met all these amazing people around the world, the one thing that stuck with us everywhere we went is that no matter how different the lifestyles were, people were so kind and open and generous and warm. And they were just all the same. At the core, people are all the same. The similarities are so much greater than differences.
You did what I'd say 100% of people say that they want to do, but I would say less than 3% or 2% actually do, which is take a year off. I would say not mid-career, but maybe kind of at a point where you were accelerating and kind of going up the ladder. What was the impetus for that? Would you recommend other people doing that? Because so many times I talk to people like 29, 30, 31 without kids, and they're like, I wish I could just take a year and travel and see the world now that I actually have a little bit of money versus when I was 20 or 21 and had to like backpack. A, what made you both decide to do that? And then B, what would you tell other people who are thinking about what does that look like on my resume when I come back?
Do it.
Before kids, right?
Well, do you know, there's a lot of families who do it with kids. Sure. I've started getting clued into them as part of the business, and it's fabulous and fascinating, and I take my hat off and salute them.
That's awesome.
I could not do it with my boys because they're just too wild. I think a lot more people do it than maybe you realize. It's much more common in Europe to do it after university or before university. So the idea of doing it wasn't foreign to me. The reason I did it in my 30s instead of my 20s is basically my parents would not let me do it before university. I came from a pretty strict family and household. So the thought of me taking a year off to go, hanging out on the beach in Australia, not happening for me.
Or like prove your worth a little bit. Like show us that you can grow your career before taking that. Yeah.
They were worried I would never come back and go to university. Right. They thought I'd just be off having the time of my life. And anyway, so that didn't happen. After university, I moved to the States. So I had, a whole new world to be learning about. But I'm really glad that we traveled in our 30s. And there's a couple of reasons. One, we had a little bit of money saved up. But two, it kept us off the young backpacker route. The one thing that we wanted to make sure we did was we wanted to go as far and as deep into countries and cultures as we could, and specifically countries that we knew it would be more difficult to get to on a vacation. So we didn't travel around Europe very much because we knew, it's much easier to take 2 weeks and go to Madrid. It's much easier to take 2 weeks and go to Hamburg on vacation. We wanted to go to places like Burma and Laos. We went to Vietnam, and we really tried to get off the tourist path as much as we could. We tried to live with families and immerse ourselves in the actual culture. So we did things like we lived with a tribe of people in a remote area in northern Laos. Those people are so remote that they don't trade in currency. They trade in balls of hair.
Oh, wow.
That a businessman from China on a motorcycle comes through and collects once a month. Those people are that far removed. Those things are insanely eye-opening and very hard to come by. So we were really grateful that we had the opportunity to go deep there. We traveled all over Burma. It was amazing.
How did you connect with these people? Like, how were you able to build quick trust for them to open their doors and, have a dinner with you like that?
So, a lot of the times we made ourselves accessible. So we took public transport, we took local buses, we took rickshaws, we talked to people. Everywhere we went, we bought a little guidebook because this was pre having a smartphone. This was pre everywhere being wireless. Literally, we would have to go and find an internet cafe in the town. And often we would arrive places there was no internet cafe or the internet was down or whatever. So, but we would always have a guidebook and we would learn some phrases. So we could talk to people, and we got really good at communicating with hand signals and gestures. But being in the places where real life people were, instead of being in the tourist circuit, we would always eat at food stands. We would go to food markets, we would eat at the fish market, we would eat at a little plastic stool stand on the side of the roads. And those were the best ways. Through doing that, we got invited to multiple weddings. We went to a wedding in Laos that we kind of accidentally crashed because we were cycling by. People just invited us in, and all of a sudden we're dancing with the bride and groom. We're thinking, this doesn't seem they haven't danced with their parents yet, they're dancing with us. But that was just how people were. We were open, and people were very kind and receptive to us. And that mind frame, it changed everything for us. It changed everything. And we saw other people who we would pass by over and over again, and they would stay on the tourist circuit. It's very easy to travel the world and go to the beautiful museums, go to the beautiful restaurants, stay in the nice hotels. It's very, very much more difficult. You have to be much more conscientious and intentional about getting in to see really how people live and what their life is like.
Yeah, you have to have the curiosity, right? And I think that's where your company is starting to instill that, starting to build that up with the kids and show them that there's differences in each of those things. Let's talk about the resume thing, because I have heard that from other people. They're like, I'm worried about what this would look like on my resume if I took a year off or 2 years off. Describe your experience, because I feel like it was probably a highlight for you to talk about, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea about Little Global Citizens at the time, but the advertising industry, as you know, is a very active and very social business. So almost everybody that I knew in the business, either my coworkers, my clients, they all knew that I was doing it. They were excited for me. A lot of people, I think, were a little bit jealous because, like you said, they had wanted to do it themselves. I didn't get any negative responses. Even my boss at the time said, oh, good for you. I wish I'd done that 10 years ago. Right. Go enjoy, have a wonderful time. I was very fortunate that our old boss at the time, Andy Weedlin, kind of followed my travels. And as he knew I was coming to the end of my year, started teasing little comments about this great new place he was working, sent me some BuzzFeed quizzes, told me about some of the people he was hiring, and kind of teased that. And my intention was not to come back and get back into the advertising industry.
Yeah.
But I was very grateful to find that all of my contacts and connections were waiting with arms open, and interesting to hear what I'd learned, what had changed in my perspective. And I actually jumped straight back into the industry.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what I'm hearing there is, like, I think so many people think, because you've talked about like career track and staying on, and I have to do the right thing to keep my career going the right way. People are human, and they actually appreciate when people veer off of that, right? Like, you did veer off and you went to go do this other thing, and it actually made people lean in and go, whoa, you're interesting. I want to learn more about you. I want to know what's going on. Would you ever go back to the advertising world now? Would you go back to ad sales?
Ad sales? No, I feel like I had an amazing, amazing time when I worked in the digital advertising industry. I loved sales. I loved my clients. I loved my coworkers. I loved the buzz. I loved the excitement. I loved the goals. I loved that feeling. But I'm in a different place in my life now. It's not that I am not interested in the marketing side. I definitely am interested in the marketing side. I'm interested in the business side, the new business side, but I feel like my horizons have opened to be so much broader now that I think I would feel like it was a little narrow for me.
Right.
I love the idea, and I've always loved the idea of startups and businesses and watching them grow and building them. And I think that's what I enjoyed about sales. I wouldn't go back in the same capacity. I don't know. Never say never. I never say never.
Yeah, you don't want to shoot down the $1 million job if it comes your way. That's fair. What advice would you give somebody who is sitting there on an idea? You know, again, one of the things that happened with me, and I've talked to a couple of other people, ad sales jobs and, you know, corporate jobs pay darn well. And it's really easy to get kind of stuck in what some would call it, you know, the golden handcuffs of, you know, making really good money. Why should I worry about this thing? But I do have this good idea. If only I could do it. What advice would you give that person?
Yeah. And I use the exact same phrase myself, golden handcuffs. I would say, look at your financials, look at your financial situation, because I think one of the most stressful things is losing that income and not knowing how or when it's going to be replaced. You need to know what your own personal runway is. You need to know what your own personal comfort level is and the comfort level of the other people in your life. I was very fortunate when I decided to make this leap. My husband was 110% behind me.
That's awesome.
My family, my parents, my brother also very much supported me. My dad had his own business for my whole life. My mom's always had her own businesses. So I had that support. So I knew that I could do it and I would be okay. But I think you need to really think long and hard about that and not underestimate the power that can have on you if you haven't thought about it and you haven't planned and prepped for it. So it's like a very pragmatic thing.
Yeah.
The other thing I would do is start telling people. Tell people you trust.
I love that. Yeah.
Get their feedback straight away. Not just the people who are going to agree.
They also then will ask you about it.
Yeah, well, then they'll keep asking you about it. And then
they'll be like, how's that going? Yeah. And you're going, oh, crap, I got to work on that. I haven't.
Yeah, it makes it real. It gives you impetus. Yeah. It makes you feel like you have deadlines. That's why, you need to have business mentors, because it does make everything very real. So tell people you trust and listen to the hard questions, listen to the negative. You need to know before you start asking people what your appetite for hearing any negativity is, because some people just are going to manifest their own fears onto you. So go into it strong, go into it confident, go into it positive. And if you financially can support yourself for however long you've projected it will take you to start making revenue, go for it. Why not? There's a whole world out there. And if after a year you decide, I don't really like this, just go back. Nobody is going to look negatively at you or criticize you if you go back to a career that you were comfortable and happy with. It shows that you have gumption. It shows you have creativity. It shows that you have confidence in yourself and you have a sense of leadership. So I would say don't worry about burning any of those bridges or losing your previous career path if you choose to go back to it.
It's great advice. I love that your mother and your father both were entrepreneurs. What were they doing? What was their business?
Well, interestingly, my dad was an accountant and he never really enjoyed being an accountant. All of his life, he never enjoyed it. And so that was actually good for me to know. I knew that he did it and it was his way of supporting our family, but I know he never enjoyed it. So when I found that I was in a position to do something that I would enjoy and feel is actually a real value and benefit to the world, I kind of felt like I had that strength because he stood behind me and said, don't spend your life doing something that you really, are not that passionate about. Go for it. I did that for my career.
It's so important. That's amazing. How about your mother? What was she doing?
My mom has done so many things. She worked with my father with his accountancy business. She decided to go retrain and be a PE teacher in schools. She had her own private dance classes back when it was jazzercise and leggings and Jane Fonda. So I remember watching her come home, study at night, and then go out and take these workout classes with women. I used to go with her. So it was just always part of the lifeblood of our family was get out and do something, hustle and change up your career. One thing is not forever. Reinvent yourself, reinvigorate yourself, and learn something new.
Oh, that's so cool. I wish I could see pictures of you and your mom in the jazzercise outfits going, bouncing around and making it happen. Besides buying the Little Global Citizen subscription, what advice would you give young parents who are trying to instill that curiosity and empathy in their children?
I would say be very considered in what you expose your kids to. Look at the books that they're reading. Make sure that the books you're reading are set in different countries, different cultures, different places. Be very considered in where you take them to shop. Take them to a little local store that is run by a female entrepreneur. Make sure that something really fun that my kids love to do, if we go to a Thai restaurant or a Vietnamese restaurant, we talk about the country and the culture before we look it up. We look at the map, we look at dance, we learn a few words. I always encourage my kids to say hello in Thai or Vietnamese. Kids love that. And if the staff in that restaurant are from Thailand or Vietnam, they're so interested to find out that your kids are learning about their country and their culture. Think about the art that you take them to go and see. Take them to festivals. And think about how you talk about other people. That is probably the most important thing you can do. Lift people up when you're talking about them. Show respect, show curiosity, show interest in people's lives and cultures. You don't have to know everything. If a kid asks you a question like, oh, why is that man wearing a turban? Don't shush them. Just say, hey, that's a great question. I don't know. Let's find out. If it's something respectful, you can go and ask a person. People will be happy to talk to you. If you want to go home and look up who wears turbans, Sikh men wear turbans. Why do they wear turbans? Let's learn about it. Go at everything from a perspective of positive interest, positive affirmation, and that is how you will set that tone for the rest of your child's life.
I love that so much. So how can people find out more about Little Global Citizens? The holiday season's coming up. We're hearing all these stories about supply chain madness. What should they do to learn more about your company?
Best thing you can do is go on the website. We are at little-global-citizens.com. If you are interested in testing a box, you can buy just one box as a gift. We find that a lot of people, especially grandparents, are looking for interesting gifts that are beyond the regular toys that your kids have got stacks of in the playroom. So if you're looking for an interesting gift that will expose your child to a whole new mind frame, ask grandma or grandpa or uncle or auntie to buy a year's subscription. Dive into an exploration of the world over the next year.
I know this might be a hard question, but what country has been your favorite that you've produced so far?
Oh, I would say England. No, that was the easiest to
Yeah.
produce. Maybe Kenya. With every box that we develop, we always talk to people from every culture. And with the Kenya box, I was very, very fortunate to be able to spend quite a bit of time talking to a Maasai leader.
Oh, cool.
So that was mind-blowing. My family's best friends are Kenyan. I've been to Kenya to have him spend the time telling me what it's like to be a Kenyan child, a day in the life of a Kenyan child, and give me that level of insight was phenomenal. And we translated that all in the box. We also worked on the Jamaica box with Devon Harris, who is the Jamaican bobsled original Olympian that the film Cool Runnings was made about. So he spent a lot of time with us. He recorded a really nice message for the kids. When they were learning about Jamaica, we included his storybook in the Jamaican box. And that was phenomenal. He's such a positive, upbeat guy, and he gave us so much time and really nice insight into his mind frame.
I love that so much. That's so cool. Yeah, my brother and sister-in-law live in Nairobi now, so I've been lucky enough to visit them a couple of times, and I've loved Kenya. I'll check out that box as well. Final question I usually ask everybody is a year's time from now. I'm not asking you to predict the future, but what would you ideally look back on and reflect going into your, it sounds like, 5th Christmas? Some of the goals, some of the aspirations. What would you feel great about a year from now?
Reaching more kids and having more opportunities to work with the education system. This is something very sorely lacking in the education system in America, not around the world, but most definitely in America. People do not talk about cultures or other people's countries anywhere near as much as they should, because it is imperative for your kids' success that they have a global outlook in the world that they're growing up in. So I would like to have more work under my belt with the education system.
Phenomenal answer. I hope you do as well, for my kids' sake and for all the kids out here. Akeelah Kuraishi, founder and CEO of Little Global Citizens, thank you so much for being part of the show. It was great seeing you.
Thanks, Keith. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to The Changeup, produced by Elena Weedland, with original music by Rodney Hazard. If you liked what you heard, we'd appreciate your support by liking, sharing, leaving a comment, and subscribing wherever you listen. Thanks once again. Until next time.